happy to be here tonight with you all, and very lucky to be at an amazing city with a lot of really phenomenal staff, many of whom you've met here already. And I get the privilege to talk to you what the city of Sacramento is doing related to this amorphous, broad, all-encompassing topic of the climate crisis. So privileged to be here to help kick off the series with this theme. So with that, I've got an outline, a few sections that we're going to cover today. First, I'll provide you with a little bit of context about how the city is approaching climate change, our role, and how we think about this issue. Next, we'll touch on my specific role and that of my team in the city organization. And I'll move on to share some examples of the types of work we're doing to address the issue of climate change. And I'll leave you a preview of some of those upcoming opportunities before we move into an engagement activity that I'm looking forward to everyone's feedback on. So first off, to break it down into climate change and the city role. We'll move to this next slide here. When you think about the role of a local agency like ours, I was just speaking with one of my colleagues, friends here at the table. The city has a very different role than the state or the federal level. We're here to deliver services. You turn on your tap and you get water. You expect to be able to get safely to your destinations. You can go to a park and ideally that park is maintained and providing amenities to you. So we're at the local level really at the front line of our communities. So bringing that to climate change, where we know there can be some controversy about what it is, who's causing it. At the end of the day, scientific consensus is near unanimous that climate change is a human-caused issue. But even if someone wants to put aside that point, we can point to issues we're already dealing with at the city, where the responses we would take to prepare for climate change are the same responses that make our community more livable, healthier, and more inviting places. So for us at the local level, it's really about looking at our policies, our rules for how new development is built, how services are operated, and looking at that at a lens from its impact on climate. So we can have a big impact by shaping development and activities. Also, many of you live, as I learned here, in certain communities north of the river in Sacramento, which is essentially not served by public transit. That's like a quarter of the city's population, without really an option to safely get around except for a car. So again, what is the city's job as it relates to climate change? It's really about facilitating the types of infrastructure and activities and behavior that's needed for us all to live full lives, breathe clean air, and continue to keep this as a more livable community for those that come behind us. So I would encourage you, if this ever starts to feel abstract or you're hearing about floods in the east, hurricanes in the west, I mean, you can bring it back to very real impacts that we're dealing with here in Sacramento. And as it relates to the city's role, my team, as it relates to climate change, we can flip to the next slide here. So we are the Office of Climate Action and Sustainability. Our job is to make good on the City Council's commitment to address climate change, reduce our emissions, and achieve this state of, quote unquote, we call it carbon neutrality. I'll explain that a little more. But to prepare for its impacts. And it really comes down to our commitments for equity, the desire to keep, again, Sacramento livable, and to prepare our communities to continue to thrive even in changing economic and global and infrastructure systems. So we're going to move on here, and I'm going to give you the two lenses from which we think about climate change at the city. On the next slide, you'll see the first view. It's what are we doing to throw fuel to the fire? How does the city contribute to the problem of climate change? Now, you might not be able to read all of these figures or the data points in your handout. Basically, what this is, it's a picture of, industrialized activities. We burn gas. We burn gas in our homes. We burn gas in our cars to get here, to take the bus. We burn a lot of fossil fuels, and that's the biggest contribution we have to climate change. On the pie chart in pink, that's the transportation sector. So buses, trucks, things that move on the road burning fuel. That's over 56% of our annual greenhouse gas emissions. Now, we can learn this because in California we have a lot of data sets. We can look at the vehicle fleets. We can get data from Caltrans on estimated miles driven on roads, and we use all of that to create these numbers. So they're estimates, but they're pretty good estimates. We have better data than most places here in California. The next largest sector of activity, it's energy used in our buildings. So combined, our buildings contribute 38% of annual greenhouse gas emissions. That would be the gas you turn on your stove when you're cooking your dinner. That's the hot water heater to warm the water before you take a shower. It's your dryer. It's also your heater or your air conditioning equipment. So again, these are activities that happen across our community that are part of our lives. It's this system that we've inherited, that we're born into. And on the aggregate, trends in our community, this is what is happening. So each year, that's about 3.4 million metric tons. There's also greenhouse metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, I should clarify. It's just a common standard for looking at these things. I should also note that the waste and the water sectors are also contributors to our greenhouse gas emissions, but it's much smaller here, and there are a lot of regulations and efficiencies, just 6% for those sectors. So this is the first lens, city role for climate change. Well, first let's define the problem, and remembering that we're the state capital, we can lead by example, and often we are a test case to do things that can be more visible and really have an impact that goes much more broadly than our jurisdictional boundaries. So what do we do? First, we need to identify the problem, and largely it comes down, again, to transportation and how we use energy in our buildings. And let me just say, because if you're a person like me and you look at this, or you go home and you're turning up the air conditioner in the summer, you're thinking like, what do I do? What's my alternative? I'm not gonna, it's not safe to just, in some cases, right? You don't want to turn off your air conditioner. I'm not telling you to stop driving your car. I'm telling you that we're here. The city's job is to make these decisions, to address these behaviors, to help you make the right decisions. And where we have the leverage to tell people what to do, for example, when a building pulls a permit, we can tell it how to construct so that it starts to shift some of what we see year over year. So that's the first part of the city's role. Now, a couple of these examples I have on this next slide here just serve to illustrate that is, again, our cars, our buildings, how we get around. And we live in America, where a lot of this community was constructed after World War II. A lot of federal money was pumped into the highway system. A large part of our economy for a time, these large auto industries. Again, this is kind of the society we've inherited. So I also leave you with that, because as we try to make change, there's a lot of real intention, there's great effort locally, but we've got a lot of work we're trying to mitigate, a lot of investments that have been made over decades and centuries that we're grappling with. And I would leave you with, these are not problems we can solve alone at the local level. We play an important part showing what's possible. For example, providing EV infrastructure. We'll be putting in EV chargers here at this community center soon. But we also need the broader system to come along, right? If you're gonna drive your EV to Modesto, my family lives there, it's challenging if you need to charge midway. There's one spot in Galt, and sometimes it's tricky if that's down. So we're going to move on to the second aspect of how we look at climate change from the local level, and that's at the impacts from a warming climate. Here on this next slide, I'm sure many of you will remember not quite a year ago in, what was that, December 31st, New Year's Eve, when we were hit with this huge storm that was incredible, flooding Highway 99, lives were lost. It looked like a cyclone hit Sacramento. And by and large, what the consensus is, it's that climate change is exacerbating storms and impacts like this. We already have to deal with risks of flood, and now it's worse. Now we're getting other impacts of extreme storms. So what does this mean? It means that for us as a municipality, we need to be planning for how we protect trees that were impacted by years and years of drought, that had weakened root systems, that toppled over with extreme winds. How do we plant in the canopy that will also cool our streets? It's also, what are our biggest risks, and how do we put our arms around the costs to mitigate them? What do those investment plans look like? So there's a lot we can be doing, and that's both from how do we stop burning gas or reduce it or burn it more efficiently, like on the last couple of slides, but then also what do we do for the impacts that our communities are already experiencing? And like all other things, it's our most vulnerable households and neighborhoods or unhoused community members that are often hit the hardest, those that are least equipped to make the investment or buy a new electric vehicle. So we're not about leaving anyone behind, and as part of the city's climate efforts, really committed to establishing a commitment to environmental justice and equity as a core part of our strategies. So we're going to move on. What is it that exactly the city has committed to do? Well, City Council in 2019 adopted a set of guiding vision principles for the 2040 General Plan. You'll be hearing more about that in coming weeks from the Community Development Department. In the meantime, I'll just leave you with this preview. Core part of the vision was establishing Sacramento as that model of what sustainable, equitable growth and development look like. Our council is committed to doing this right. That's the end goal. And on this next slide, there's some more examples of how the vision and guiding principles of the general plan define that. It's about neighborhoods that are quote unquote complete, so you can get around safely walking or rolling or taking transit. You can get to work, you have school, you have a park. It's also about taking those strategies to reduce the burning of fossil fuels and to reduce our consumption of limited natural resources. So these are the policy commitments. The general plan is a legally binding document, especially applicable for new development, which must comply. The draft of that document's out for review now, but it has some very strong policy commitments for sustainability. And that takes us to, well, okay, how do we move beyond the policy? So next, I'm going to walk us through a little bit of that organizational structure. So, organizational structure for new all-emerging crisis like climate. Well, on this next slide, you'll see our Office of Climate Action and Sustainability that has 3 of us in the office. So I am the city's climate action lead, as Randy noted. Sarah Kolarik is our sustainability analyst, and we have a graduate intern, Sarab Harahali. So we are the office, and as is typical at the city, we'll make an office. We're gonna, put a special shiny pin on these issues that we know are important, and that's a really important step. The harder part is the resources that come along behind it. So it's important for you to take away from this is that, our job in our office, it's not that we're the people with capes doing all the work and getting all the money. Our job is really to make climate everyone's job across the organization. It's about how do we institutionalize this across the day-to-day work of the people you see fixing potholes in your roads, the people at the parks. How do we ensure that it's really built into the 4,000 plus person work that the city does on a daily basis. So I say that to just emphasize, we have a team at the city, and many of our environmental advocates continually do point to the challenges with staff capacity. And it's true, across the city, yes, capacity is an issue. There's a lot of need in our community. However, whether or not we had 3 staff or 6 staff, we're still not able to fix the problem. So we're really trying to focus on those partnerships, both internally and externally, to build capacity more broadly. I'm excited to be with you all here today and to get some ideas in our activity. But I'll move on to our next slide as it relates to the city's organizational chart. Again, this is a little hard to read. We've got our charter officers at the top, and then we have our assistant city managers, this gold level. All these other smaller boxes with a lot of green, those are departments or offices. The takeaway here is all of those circled in green are involved or supporting on some of our key early action climate tasks. So again, we're an office of 3, but this is the work of the organization. We convene an internal green team of many of our key staff that are managing sustainability projects or key thought leaders internally, and they're involved in helping us to connect the dots. Sometimes it is that. It's connecting dots, identifying opportunities, bringing funding to an issue, or building on the great innovations of many of our incredible community leaders, some of whom I see here in the room tonight. And another takeaway is that although we have one office of climate action and sustainability, we do have many people at the city that work on these issues. We have an entire department of utilities, and they deal with water issues, water conveyance, water treatment. We have a transportation team. We have urban forestry. These people do a lot of the hard work. Now, what I've identified in purple, we have a few departments with dedicated quote-unquote sustainability staff. So what I mean by that is, kind of like our office, those are people that are tasked with that intersection of issues as it relates to sustainability. You're not just designing a bike lane, or you're not just planting trees, but you're trying to fill these broader gaps, because sustainability, climate change, it's really these cross-sector, intersectoral wicked challenges that we're faced with. So when you count those teams, we have about 10.5 committed FTE at the city focused on sustainability climate issues. And that's something I'm proud of. We have sustainability analysts, managers. We're hiring for a sustainability specialist. That vacancy's open a couple more weeks. Please check it out, spread the word. And we work together. Again, it's about how do we help everyone understand their touch points on climate. How do we give them actionable steps, find the resources where needed, and move forward? So on this next slide, just to simplify a bit of our work and how our office approaches this, it's really within these 3 categories. First, internal capacity, building the processes, supporting across the organization through groups like our green team. We're also convening an internal task force with more of our management that will start soon with the intent of, again, building that higher level of awareness. Second, it's about the partnership piece, which I already mentioned. And through our partnerships, we've been really successful bringing in money that the city doesn't have, whether that's for retrofits of households in our communities with electric heat pumps or tree plantings. That's another grant we're seeking. We do more when we do it together. Lastly, in the third bucket, there's a number of key strategic projects which our council prioritized that we're helping to move forward. We can't do everything, but we're really trying to take steps where we can have an impact. In terms of the guidance for our office, this next slide gives you a quick snapshot of some of those key documents that are helping lead and prioritize the things we're up to. First off, how many people heard about the Mayor's Commission on Climate Change? Kelly did. Great. A couple hands. So Mayor Steinberg and former Mayor Christopher Cabaldon convened this community stakeholder group, a task force, to recommend how the city should move to carbon neutral. They created a report in 2020. They presented their recommendations to the council, and out of that, the city council prioritized some items, including my appointment, someone to work on climate, as well as some key activities like building electrification. Now next, there's already the strong policy commitments council's made. We talked about those just a moment ago with the general plan. And third, we had some other external review. The city auditor took a look at our internal efforts to address climate change, and he found a lot of opportunities for improvement. The need for more processes, need to better demonstrate results, communicate to the public, communicate internally. So all of these things are really guiding the work that our office has prioritized and helping us to move forward. We summarized a lot of those actions in our climate implementation work plan, and a lot of the policy ideas are carried forward in the draft climate action and adaptation plan. Now that's a lot of plans. I hope not to lose you here. The main thing is that there's been a lot of thought and analysis that goes into this, that our team's moving forward. So let's move on to the next section of our presentation here. I'm going to share a bit of a flavor for some of those activities underway. And the really important point, again, we're doing this in partnership. So all these things I'll describe, we're doing with other city departments, we're doing with other external partners, and it's about how we do more together. So first off, carbon neutrality by 2045. That's a long time away. We do have some nearer term metrics for 2030. And these come from that draft Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, or CAP. This is sort of the markers. This is where we need to be headed to hit carbon neutral by 2045. And it just gives you a sense of the scale of the issue. We've got less than 5% of our cars or thereabout are zero emission right now in the community. Well, to hit our goals or to stay on track, by 2030, we need to get to nearly 1/3 of those cars that are zero emission, or figure out how to dramatically get people out of the cars. Next, we also need to cut gas use in our buildings by about 1/3. We need to cut vehicle miles traveled by 25%, and dramatically increase the amount of people that ride by bike or take transit. Those are some of the big picture metrics. Well, how are we doing moving towards that? On this next slide, this just gives you a quick snapshot of efforts underway. We've got over 20 near-term actions underway to move in line towards those targets. And there's a few items we've completed, some key ordinance updates. City Council gave us a one-time funding allocation of $4.4 million for some of these early action tasks. Now, working creatively with regional partners, with our local partners, staff has worked since 2021. We've secured over $145 million of funding to augment the city's investment. So again, with a little bit of local commitment, we've been able to bring a lot more, and that's with the support of our state legislators, that's with competitive grants, and it's with creative things like the Creative Core funding, my colleague Jason's involved with here from the Office of Arts and Culture, which isn't explicitly climate, but has climate as a key goal. So takeaway from this slide, there's work underway. We've made our early investments go further, bringing in more funding, and now for some examples of what that funding is getting us. So we've been evaluating issues like distribution of tree canopy. This map is one of the assessments we've completed. An urban forest master plan is coming forward. We have worked with the Air Quality Management District to distribute 186 air quality sensors through our neighborhoods. While this doesn't directly reduce emissions, it's a key part of getting information into the hands of our residents so they can take action to be safe, and it's a step towards helping us figure out where to prioritize investments. Thank you. In addition, we're still staying busy trying to get more funding. So we've applied, just in the last 3 months, we've submitted $14 million of grant requests, which would do things like improve our floodgates and also expand tree plantings throughout the community. Next up, if you've driven through the central city lately, you'll have seen these new green lanes throughout. We've got now over 70 blocks of protected parking bike lanes going in throughout central Sacramento, trying to make it easier for people to bike. Now that project was about a $15 million project. So I know that often it feels like there's so much more that needs to be done. There's so much for the city to do. An important thing to know is we don't have a lot of set-aside discretionary funds for things like bike lanes. We have to go secure competitive grants to do that from the region or from the state. And so we're only doing these because we've been able to get that funding. Also recently, we started work on the Broadway Complete Streets project, which will have a range of improvements along the Broadway corridor. Plus, this picture on the bottom right of the slide, we've worked hard. We brought in like 7 grants through the Clean California program, and that includes neighborhood beautification and improvements that help to keep it safe and lively and engaging for walking and biking. This is an example of a mural that went in along Franklin Boulevard. So next up, another example of our transportation work, again, through a competitive grant, secured funding to put in EV chargers in priority neighborhoods underserved by charging infrastructure, including places like this community center. They'll get EV chargers, and we secured funding for an e-trike lending program. If you have a library card and you're older than 18, you can go to Colonial Heights, and if one of the e-trikes is in, they've been very popular, so it's hard to get one, I think. You can actually check an e-trike out for up to 2 weeks. So this is trying to get this technology, these amenities into our neighborhoods. We'll be increasing that to 30 e-trikes and bringing them to a second library location as well. As part of that project, we've engaged a local comic book artist, and there's an equity analysis and car share that will be going in at a library center as well. Next, we're leading by example through the city fleet. We have 120 light-duty electric vehicles. That means purchased our first electric refuse truck. It's taken a long time to get built, and we've put in a fast charger to support it, continuing to advance the work on that front. Now, turning to the building sector that I mentioned, electrification is a big priority of the city, and there's a lot of opportunities. We are in SMUD territory, and that is amongst some of the cleanest power and also the most affordable power in California. And so we've conducted analysis that by and large, all of our single-family residents, the models show us, stand to gain cost savings by electrifying your heaters, your hot water heaters, and getting in more efficient air conditioning units. So we have a number of tools available. If we go to the next slide here, the city released a Zero Home tool. This is a snapshot. You can plug in your address. If it's a single family home, it runs some calculations and models to help you show cost savings you could realize and show the financing and rebates that are available. We've also released a draft strategy for how to electrify existing buildings, really focused on how to get those units replaced at the end of their useful life, and really focusing by how we can advance pilots and partnerships for targeted investments throughout our communities. Also, we're going to touch on quickly here that with climate, the next slide shows us there's also opportunities. There's a lot of potential for jobs and high-wage opportunities. The city secured $6.9 million of grant funding for green workforce pathways through the Californians for All program. About $500,000 was distributed in grants to community partners, and through that, we're getting 29 paid interns placed throughout the community to do things like tree plantings or home improvements, getting paid to learn this, and placed in local nonprofits. We'll also be onboarding a cohort of interns through departments at the city, similarly looking to start a climate cohort with some of these interns as well. So in terms of where we're going next, there's a lot of this work we've got to continue, a lot of opportunities to keep moving. But a big one I've mentioned already, the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. That's out for public review. And if you take a look at it, it identifies many of these actions that the city can take in greater detail to both prepare for climate, reduce gas use, but also invest in our communities to really ensure people are resilient, saving money on their bills, and again, living healthy life. So the access to clean air and the amenities that you need. That's what it comes down to. So that was released in April. It's still out. There's a level of review still happening, and we expect council to adopt those in early next year. So take a look at that if you want more details on what the city plans to do. But that gets us through the content I wanted to present. So I'm going to stop there for questions before we move to our activity.